Hey everybody. So I was thinking that since yesterday I did a big blast of poetry, today would be a fiction day. I'm trying to recover as much of my older stuff as possible. Oh, yeah, should point out this is my Hybrid Theory shirt that wifey got me from anniversary present. Really good. I'm going to start by reading a story inspired by Third Eye Blind. I can't remember how long ago I wanted to do it, probably 2013, that I got the notion of writing microfictions and vignettes based on the songs from their self-titled album. I might pick up doing that again just for funsies, I don't know. I'm very spread out right now with a bunch of other writing projects that keep doing the whole stop-start thing. But so it goes. Okay. So let's start with Losing a Whole Year based on the song by Third Eye Blind. Bill groaned as Missy slammed the door on her way out. They had been living together for a year, and only now were things starting to turn to shit. He could still remember the times when they would do nothing more than stay in bed all day. They did almost everything there. Eat, watch TV, smoke some weed, almost everything but sleep. Well, they did sleep, but it was only in the carnal sense. They wouldn't even answer the phone if it rang. They just laughed it off like some in-joke they shared and never had to talk about. There, maybe that'll keep you occupied. Wicked. Job? What job? Neither of them needed one, hence the lack of productivity. Missy had a rich dad. Even better, a rich, indulgent dad, and one who had left her a golden parachute. Whenever she talked, she sounded like the cha-ching of cash registers. She was cute, too. On top of all that, Daddy's little girl, adorable but petulant. Spoiled even though her dad didn't really love her. Just to maintain her affections in the wake of her parents' nasty divorce. Bill always thought it was weird that she wore velvet gloves even when it wasn't cold out. She liked that sense of unity, though. It probably reminded her of a time when her parents were still together. Since the split, though, she had gone from being a goody-goody princess to, well, think of the complete opposite. She had quite the rebellious streak in her, though she had once been sweet and wholesome. She thought it was a grand idea to be living with Bill, living in Zen, in the words of Missy's uptight, severely conservative. Take a guess what kind of conservative? Well, Bill had been a philosophy student in his own way. He had a unique outlook on life, if that counted. His own truths, he liked to call them. Missy latched onto them looking for something, anything, to believe in. Bill wouldn't deny he felt a bit used in that sense. Maybe Missy didn't actually love him, she just loved his ideas. And maybe it would have been better off for the both of them if he hadn't just brought that up a few minutes ago. She had responded by slapping him and storming from the room. It was right after she left that it finally hit him. You never actually listened to me. You never heard a single goddamn word I said. Oh yeah, this reminds me, when I was first listening to this album when I was like 8, I thought goddamn was the spiciest word I'd ever hear in a song. Oh boy, was I proven wrong when I got into Limp Bizkit. I said the word fuck so many times while listening to that one song that my sister even yelled at me. And she was the one who gave me their CDs. Okay, I'm going to now read a story called Finding That Fire. It was one of the ones that I produced in my grad school creative writing class. I honestly can't remember if Unrequited made it out of the development phase. I'm sure it did, but I lost the text of it, and it's probably for the better, because that story sucked. Alone on the bridge that night, they stood staring up at the infinite sky. The moon gazed down as they looked up, the little patches of ice illuminated by the hazy light. Winter was fleeing now, the frost dissipating as the change of seasons renewed the earth. The approaching spring heralded fresh heat, the equinox only 10 days away. The top of the West Village parking garage yielded better stargazing results, especially at sundown. Excuse me. But Lux loved the way the moon would shimmer over the long cobbled bridge that connected the village to the main body of the campus. Lux loved the moon, and Rory loved Lux. They loved each other the same way that the plants might emerge from the ground again, tentative in the fresh dew before the sun quests across the horizon, a burning campaign throwing its torch through the thatched marshmallow of the clouds. What are you doing, Wicked? Or the way flocks of birds would return north after a southern sojourn in search of warmth. Warmth that could not be found in a hemisphere slumbering under biting blizzards of wild winds and inconsiderate cold. Winter always led to moaning and wailing and much gnashing of teeth. Spring did not. I still can't understand why Becker had such a problem with that. Sure, it borders on purple prose, but again, just a pretentious douche who didn't like my word choice. Talk about dick. You know what, Ro? We should dance, Lux whispered, unwilling to disturb the serenity of the moment. Rory laughed. Ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, Lou? She huffed with an exasperated sigh while trying to not roll her eyes. A gesture of disdain long out of style, she smacked him on the chest. If you're going to quote the Joker, at least quote the good one, she said, trying not to laugh. Some people call me the space cowboy, some people call me the gangster of love, Rory replied without missing a beat. Lux shook her head so that her hair twanged under her slouch hat. That day had been refreshingly delicious with its sunshine and warmth, but after dark and with 3 a.m. approaching, the cold reclaimed its rightful kingdom. My best friend is such a weirdo, she said. Rory cupped his hand under her chin and lifted it so that their eyes met. Just so you know, we're not about to kiss. So we're clear. My Crystal, to be clear as plexiglass and hockey. Yeah, that was a bit of dreadful dialogue. I'm going to shorten that. Now, Lux did start laughing. If she kept it up long enough, she'd soon be howling and waking up half the people in Millennium Hall or Barton House, and maybe even the people up in University Village besides. Way to diffuse the tension, loser, Is it diffuse or defuse? Can never tell. Bitch, Rory said, half in jest. Jerk, Lux returned in kind. This was an old inside joke of theirs, cribbed from their favorite TV show, it was meant without malice, however it might seem to the outside observer. This makes me wonder if I should read the Homecoming trilogy. It was the first thing I wrote after I left Towson, but it's a lot less meaningful now since certain friendships were scorched, but that's neither here nor there. It was meant without malice, however it might seem to the outside observer. They linked hands and swayed on the spot, but after a few minutes, Lux dug her fingers into the crest of Rory's shoulder blade, and Rory curled his hand around the edge of her hip, the complete opposite of what they were supposed to do. Rory was a terrible lead and a worse follower. But Lux more than made up for it. For what might have been the 567th time, Rory complained about this. Coordination isn't the issue here. You walk around every day, step after step, your legs falling in line. You're just not trying hard enough. Trying hard enough? We're dance partners for the showcase. It's not like you're teaching me how to do kung fu. They stopped and broke apart. A searing moment passed between them, a sizzling beat hotter than a charcoal grill. We're not ready yet, but we will be. Lux reached for the side of Rory's neck and started caressing it. Caressed it. She squeezed his shoulder and then grabbed his arm with a reassuring weight. I promise. Now let's go back in. The moon's gone anyhow. They linked arms as they went inside, their shoulders touching. Sexual tension with a capital S and a capital T. Should have been fairly obvious to anyone who workshopped it. But I honestly can't quite remember now. It's been way too long. The next day, they ate a late breakfast at the Down on Your Luck diner before class. While Lux had banana pancakes, Rory had chicken and waffles. They held hands across the table as they ate, and every now and then shared bites off each other's forks. The bake sale yesterday was fun, Lux said, sipping her coffee. Yeah, Rory replied. I just wish we had more snickerdoodles. He set his cranberry juice down. They kept eating. I also wish we didn't have to go to class today. For why? You know it gets you out of the room. You just don't want to be... You just don't want to be stuck inside all day while it starts getting warmer, do you? You don't want to be stuck in... It's not that. I just want to spend all day chilling with you, drinking jamba by the koi pond or something. We do that every day, Ro. Doesn't make it any less special, though. Lux grinned. I can't remember if Towson had a koi pond. Whatever. Tell you what, she said, after we're both done with class tonight, we'll go have a bonfire in Glen Woods, just you and me. Rory didn't seem too enthusiastic about it, despite how chipper Lux was. They paid and left. It was almost noon, and they had classes in different buildings. They wouldn't see each other until dinner time, after which they would go to Ballroom Dance Club together. When they came outside, they shared their secret handshake, capped off with a crushing hug, and went to class. Later that night, they met for dinner. They ate at Paul's in the University Union. After dinner, they decided just to go to the Glenwoods for their bonfire since it was so close by. Did that contradict something? Rory had the presence of mind to bring a box of matches, but he still wasn't sure what he could do to light the fire. Lux was equally flummoxed, although she enjoyed giggling at his several failed attempts to get the fire going. She teased him with unhelpful suggestions such as blow on it and put your back into it, and lastly, close your eyes and make a wish. After 10 more frustrating minutes, Rory finally got the fire to catch. They sat together watching the flames dance as they grew larger. Lux laid her head on his shoulder. Remember last summer we met at that big bonfire at the beach? Yeah, Rory said. You spilled root beer all over me, you goofball. Lux shoved him playfully. Hey, it was cute, okay? You'll have something to tell our kids. Rory recoiled in mock horror, so that Lux slid off his shoulder. You want kids? Shouldn't we go on a date first? Lux righted herself. Well, maybe, or maybe I don't want to lose my best friend. They stared at each other in the gathering gloom, the fire crackling. All the same, they couldn't bring themselves to make eye contact. Maybe once I fix this up correctly, I can get it published. We'll see about that. The next morning, even as he got out of the shower, Rory still smelled smoke on his skin. He should have known this would happen, especially since he had been to other bonfires in the past. But this one was different. Somehow, only he couldn't figure out why. His phone started ringing. I Surrender by A Day to Remember. It was his ringtone for Lux. Hey, Ro, guess what? Chicken butt, he answered reflexively. Let's change that. Rory could tell Lux ignored it out of habit, although he could almost hear her grimace through the phone. No, you dummy. My boyfriend's high school friend Shay is visiting for a few days. I told her about you and she really wants to meet you. That's awesome, Rory said, but he wasn't all that enthused about it. So now we sort of have a double date, like tonight. Wait, what? Rory almost dropped the phone. What do you mean, sort of have a double date? We're going to Cheesecake Factory for dinner. She sounded far too excited about this. Why do you sound like you inhaled 6 balloons? You need a girlfriend, idiot. Rory couldn't argue with that logic. So, later on, Rory met up with Lux, her boyfriend Jackson, and Shay. They piled into Jackson's blue Camaro and headed to Cheesecake Factory. Lux had arranged a reservation for 4 at 7:30. Smart thinking considering how packed it was for the dinner rush on a weeknight. They both squeezed into a booth near the front of the restaurant. While the boys got Dr. Peppers, the girls both got water with no ice. And both got glasses, water with no ice, and slices of lemon. Lux sat with Jackson, leaving Rory with Shay. I bet you didn't see that coming, right? The plot twist of Lux having a boyfriend. You probably should have, though. Not exactly groundbreaking here. Rory didn't think much of this configuration. How on earth was he supposed to talk to her if she was bunched in with him? Sitting across from each other would have been easier, and why not? Jackson and Shay were old friends to begin with. They shared the bread starter in awkward silence. Although Rory offered to split a packet of butter with Shay, he ended up splitting one with Lux instead. But he could see the goosebumps that rioted up and down Jackson's arm when he brushed Shay's fingers as they ripped a chunk of bread apart. In point of fact, Jackson and Shay fed each other bits of bread. Mortified, Lux slathered too much butter on hers and jabbed Rory with the edge of the knife. Rory hadn't been paying attention either way. He was too preoccupied with imagining what it would be like to feed bits of bread to Lux, but at the same time his gag reflex almost kicked in. That sort of cutesy couple stuff would just be weird. If he did it with Lux, wouldn't it? The uncomfortable silence turned stony as they progressed through dinner. Rory felt more and more out of place with each forkful of mashed potato, and Lux stabbed at her carrots as though they had each insulted her family. By the time their orders of cheesecake arrived for dessert, chocolate chip cookie dough for Lux and Jackson, and vanilla bean for him and Shay, Lux looked ready to murder someone with a spoon. Before anyone could take a bite, Lux got up and left the table, racing to the bathrooms. Tears glimmered in her eyes, leaving Rory disconcerted. Vexed, he also left the table a minute or two later so that Jackson and Shay gaped at them with forks, halfway to digging into the cakes. Is this double spaced, or am I just imagining things? There we go. Rory knew better than to look in the gents' room, so he cautiously poked his head into the ladies'. Lux was full on crying by now, leaning against the wall by the paper towel dispenser. Her carefully applied mascara, already streaking. You noticed too, huh? She said. Cut that back. Rory nodded, feeling it would be out of line to speak. He stepped across the threshold and approached her without another word. He put his arms around her and she sobbed into his chest. He helped her mop up her messy face with a paper towel or two, and she scooped a few shaky handfuls of water from the sink into her mouth to calm down. Rory rubbed her shoulders. Even then, she couldn't look him in the eye. Sorry. Why do I always do this to myself? I should have known. Shay's been around him since high school. You don't stop being neighbors. Was she cheer captain and he was on the football team too? No, editor-in-chief of the school paper, played volleyball and saxophone and jazz band, and he played lacrosse and wrestled and led the school play. Sounds like they were soulmates, right? Lux wiped her eyes, if they found each other in the dark. She stooped to kiss his cheek, and he kissed her forehead. The height difference between them was always a bit of an obstacle, but she had a year and 3 inches of leg on him. I think it's time to go home, she whispered in his ear. Soulmates, one word or two? I can never tell. Welcome to on-the-fly editing time with B-Man, because this is what I do. Everything makes much more sense when I say it out loud, which is something I don't typically do when I'm actually writing the goddamn thing. When they came out of the bathroom and returned to the table, they expected all the people around them, or at the least Jackson and Shay, to be giving them wide eyes and wider berths. The other diners had gone back to their coffee and cakes. For their part, Jackson and Shay were attached at the face. Rory flinched because he fully expected Lux to go into hurricane mode, but Lux only smirked and threw down money for her part of the bill. She turned and walked out to the curbside and hailed a taxi. Rory tossed his own money onto the table and left, grabbing Lux's forgotten coat. Check, please, Rory quipped, and then he took his leave as well. By the time he got outside, even though it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes later, Lux was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she had already caught a cab that she had hailed and flagged down, he surmised. Nonplussed, he pulled out his phone. He thought about calling her, but instead called the number of a taxi driver he was a frequent customer of, one he tipped generously every single time. When the driver, Sergei, rolled up 10 minutes later, Rory threw himself into the passenger seat and groaned. Sergei patted him on the shoulder. Bad date, my friend? He said in his gravelly Slavic rumble. Rory often imagined his driver would make a better fit as a hell-raising lead vocalist for an underground Russian death metal band than a cab driver in Towson. Yup. Rory failed to buckle his seatbelt on the first try. He got it on the second. Shaking his head, Sergei shifted into drive after idling when Rory first got in. Back to campus, da? Da. Rory went back to his dorm and waited. He started to worry when his texts and calls went unanswered. He found her sitting outside in the West Village Commons. He took her inside the Commons building, bought 4 pints of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream, and said, "You're staying with me tonight, Lux." "What about your roommates?" "To hell with my roommates. They spend all their time at the library anyway. Midterms are coming up. No one will be around." He went back to his room to eat the ice cream. Rory set up his DVD player and pulled out Lilo and Stitch. "If this doesn't cheer you up, I can always just squeeze the sadness out of you." I'll be right back. Go to plug and watch. We're going on 35 minutes now. If this doesn't cheer you up, I can always just squeeze the sadness out of you. When they had finished 2 out of the 4 pints, it was going on past 10:30. Curled up together on the bed, Rory knew they were both about to fall asleep. His heart hammered as he felt her hand on his chest. He buried his face in her fragrant hair that smelled of lavender tea tree-scented shampoo. Gradually, their breathing slowed. Their foreheads bumped together, causing Lux to giggle despite her tears. The sound of her laugh lifted his downcast spirit. He touched his forehead to hers again, and so they drifted off. The day of the dance showcase finally arrived. Rory and Lux waited backstage, hardly able to breathe. They watched the other acts, mainly the step team, the dance team, 2 or 3 different a cappella groups, and 3 different sororities perform before them. Although the Ballroom Dance Club was slated to have a team performance, Rory and Lux had signed up as a separate dance for themselves. The dance they had been practicing was called the Wildfire Dance. "Oh my god, bro, I can't take all this pressure," Lux whispered, gripping his arm so tight they went pale. Her nails left vivid pinprick marks like gouges in chipping drywall. Rory bit on his inner gum to block out the pain. "Lux, relax. You're the best dancer in the entire club. The others are doing their own thing, we're doing ours. Breathe. Just breathe." It was their turn to go, and as they strutted out on stage, they waved to all their friends and family. Their dance, set to Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire, was supposed to be the final performance of the showcase. Based on the flamenco, it was an intense dance with a lot of flourishing, quick movements, high kicks, and hard stomps. Rory and Lux locked eyes and held their shared gaze as their dance proceeded. I seemed to be switching my R's and my L's unintentionally. Floods of meaning and color rushed into the breathless space between them. There was a world of distance in that one sublime moment in which they realized how much they really meant to each other. As the song ended, Lux spun away from Rory and extended her leg toward the ceiling, pointing the arch of her foot straight up with her toes, helping to form an exclamation point. Rory planted his feet and watched as Lux brought her leg back down with a swift chopping motion. The soles of their shoes began to sizzle and smoke. Fire bloomed from their shoes as Lux's foot finished touching the floor. The smoke alarms went off, spooked. The building quickly emptied out, Rory and Lux falling behind, trying to hold on to each other in the stampede. Whooping with flushed excitement and triumph, they both sprinted for the bridge to find that same magical spot that they had been spotlighted under a moonbeam several weeks earlier. Just as they reached that spot, a thunderclap boomed overhead and a monsoon roared in, pelting everyone with a ferocious driving rain. Rory and Lux didn't mind. Still raucous in their uproar, they put their arms around each other and shared their first real kiss, until they were both numbed by the cold wind and the realization that love was friendship caught fire. So, yeah, there that is. Let's see. We've got time for one more. It's the Downfall of Castle Tricks. It was a story I wrote based on an idea that Wifey came up with in her younger days. I tried to fuse her invented world with mine, so it may or may not have actually worked out. Last edit was on December 31st, 2019. In the midst of the creation of the Stormverse. So this is a Google Doc. Select all, format line space, and make it double spaced. Okay. The Downfall of Castle Tricks. The legions of the enemy were everywhere. Alexei did not have to look far to surmise this. Let's change that word. His compatriot and best lieutenant Dayton Farhollow raised the faceplate on his helmet. His normally cheerful face looked grim, worry lines chiseling his visage into a rough-hewn block of sandstone above his wispy beard. We're cut off and surrounded. We can't regroup from here, and worst of all, we can't let this turn into another debacle like the Gauntlet Pass. Alexei rubbed his temples, shifting the rune-laden circlet he wore in place of a helmet. As Crown Prince of Tricks, his primary duty was to serve as field commander. He did not need Dayton to remind him of the pass, one of the last defenses Castle Tricks had. 3 days and 3 nights of bloodshed and horrific carnage had led to one of the most crushing defeats that the Royal Army of Tricks had ever suffered. Now the enemy's troops were on their very doorstep. Alexei's breathing came slow and raspy, much like the rattling of a certain snake. How fitting and ominous. The kingdom's death rattle was looking more and more reality, all because he had failed in his last confrontation with the enemy at Gauntlet Pass. Send word to all the men who have ears yet, he said. Fall back to the drawbridge. We'll hold them at the moat. We must give the court enough time to evacuate. Aye, Dayton agreed, though his voice betrayed his doubt. But first we must find them. Then find them we shall. Alexei set his jawline. Today would be a day for...
Krishna Swami Laxman, commonly known as R.K. Laxman, was an Indian cartoonist, illustrator, and humorist.
Alexa, stop. Alexei set his jawline. Today would be a day for victory, not defeat. And for the rest of this, I'm just going to call him the Prince. Because when Alexa goes off, it kind of comes out of nowhere. What, Shirley? What? Oh. I don't know why. Both of the dogs get startled whenever someone rolls into the parking lot. Wicket. No. A cadre of the enemy's... let's change that. Make it... A cluster of the enemy's troops came for them, and the prince did not need Dedan's shout of warning to see them rushing towards them. Focusing his will, the prince flexed his arms in a circle around him, and a pentagram of energy flared to life beneath his feet. Numerous rocks shot out of the ground and settled into orbit around him. The runes on his circlet glowed with power. He released the rocks like bullets, felling the enemy troops in front of him. Dedan spurred his horse forward into the press of the fray. Left alone, the prince concentrated to regain his focus. Combat spells were particularly taxing. He strode forward, unslinging his oaken staff from his back. With a quiet command word to the ruby set in its crown, he blasted aside enemy mooks as he strode forward. Still, his reserve of magic was not limitless. When he felt a renewed tightness in his chest, he stopped and resorted to using his staff to knock aside enemies, cracking their skulls through their shoddy bronze helmets. The enemy had many minions, more than even the valiant Knights of Trix, of which Dedan was the commander, could dispatch. A steady stream of knights fled the other way, their courage and resolve broken by the flood of chaos around them. Then the prince's reverie broke, and he saw the epicenter of it all, Balthazar. Tall, implacable, clad in heavy plate armor as mercilessly dark as a moonless night, Balthazar swung his claymore in wide arcs, cleaving through armor as if it were rice paper. The prince put his staff away and reached for his own sword. Though skilled in fencing, he knew a broadsword would be a better match for Balthazar's own blade. "My master has waited for this day, young prince," Balthazar rumbled. "The day of his triumph is at hand at last." "True enough, Balthazar. I grant you that he has in 3 months swept through all this country until the very capital itself lies threatened, but his triumph is not here." Balthazar laughed as their swords crossed. Despite his own prodigious skill, Alexei felt himself driven backwards. He could only deflect and parry Balthazar's heavy strikes. With a hurried command word to his sword, the prince ignited it. A lucky hit to the rib cage gave Balthazar pause. That was the key then, stick and move. But it had been a long and terrible day, and clashing with the hulking champion of the enemy had devoured what strength he had left. All thoughts of valor forgotten, the prince disengaged. If he was to die, then he would die in a place of his choosing. He lobbed a spike of ice at Balthazar's uncovered face. Balthazar roared his fury. His lone fear was ice, and the prince knew that all too well. Alexei's flight gave haste to the enemy, and his own men retreated. Though delayed, his orders were being followed. Dozens of the enemy's minions were being drowned in the castle's restless moat. The drawbridge would hold, at least for the nonce. What, Shirley? Only one word and one thought mattered to him in that moment, and it was not failure or even success. Maya! The name of his wife lifted a tremendous burden of exhaustion from him. He blasted aside enemies and allies alike in his haste to reach his wife. He had to be sure she had escaped, that this vile day would not mean her end as well as his. But when he reached the elegant concourse outside of the small council hall, he found its fountains overflowing with blood and its tapestries streaked with gore. He kicked aside the doors into the hall's inner chamber. A pile of corpses greeted him, all former courtiers. He had never cared much for the politicians that crowded the halls of the castle. Still, this was appalling. So, we meet again, young prince. An eerily familiar voice sounded out of the gloom and the stench of death. The enemy had come forth then, Lord Sebastian, Archduke of the Four Rivers. 3 months ago he had launched his insurrection, and now his rebellion had reached the beating heart of the kingdom of Trix itself, and the royal family. As though reading his thoughts, Sebastian cackled, "Your precious royals are dead. Some have escaped, but I have brought an end to the monarchy. Your kingdom is mine." "Liar!" the prince bellowed, lunging into the room. Sebastian motioned, and Alexei slammed into the nearest wall. "Your darling wife was one of those who escaped me. Alas, how I wish to feast on her fair flesh. I must confess your taste in women is excellent, dear boy, but make no mistake, I will find her, and she will join the rest of her damnable family in some dark, miserable corner of hell." 3 darts streaked across the room and struck Alexei in the throat. A bolt of dark energy hit him in the chest, and then he felt it begin to cave in of its own volition. Sebastian approached his limp body. "She can find you there, I am sure of it, with much wailing and gnashing of teeth." He stomped on Alexei's weakening chest. Blood erupted like lava from his mouth. "Mia!" The sounds of pain and slaughter sounded in his ears as all went dark. The Knights of Trix had been massacred, the kingdom of Trix had been cast down, and Castle Trix fell into the hands of its most dangerous enemy. So, we're coming up on 55 minutes now, so that's enough for now.